So the fact that I've asked you to use Black Americans, but you insist on using blacks with a lowercase b, does in fact tell us everything that we need to know about your level of ignorance and bias. But I'm glad that you do acknowledge that enslaved labor made the United States cotton economy possible. And it was the cotton economy that transformed the United States from a colonial society into a global trading power. But your timeline is off. Because the cotton economy took off after the War of 1812, and by then, the status of enslaved was established as being based on race, and the indentured servitude of Irish was on its way out. At that point, Irish Americans were already slave patrollers and overseers. If we think critically about your claim that if they did not have access to enslaved black labor, they simply would have gotten the Irish to do it, it falls apart. Because if it was an option to procure laborers from Europe, where the colonists were already coming from, why would they have ever pursued the much more costly and much more time-consuming process of importing enslaved labor from Africa? And it's because using Irish indentured servants didn't work. 200 years before, in the early colonies, in the 1600s, the original plan was to rely primarily on convict and indentured labor from Europe, as well as enslaved labor of Native Americans. But the arrival of the Europeans introduced diseases that killed too many Native Americans, and Irish indentured servants were quickly dying when put to hard labor. So they had to rely more on the transatlantic slave trade. Now, what they did not understand is that enslaved Africans had developed immunity to European diseases over time because of trade. So that enslaved Africans were immune to diseases that had killed Native Americans, and that enslaved Africans were acclimated to heat, which was killing Irish indentured servants, contributed to the pseudoscientific racist idea that enslaved Africans were built for labor. So actually, reliance on the enslaved labor of Africans and Black Americans was a necessity to growing the United States cotton economy. But another thing that I was wondering is, could you please explain to us why you find this funny?